You're listening to Innovating Tomorrow's Medicine with Dr. Jeff Trickett.
In this episode, I'm speaking with Sheila Gujrathi, biotech entrepreneur and executive, healthcare investor and drug developer with over 25 years of experience in the industry. She's founded, built and run numerous biotech companies and led the development and approval of life-changing pharmaceutical drugs, including Orencia and Nulojix. Sheila is co-founder of the Biotech CEO Sisterhood, a group of trailblazing female CEOs, and the South Asian Biopharma Alliance. So the work you versus the real you gap in your Northwestern commencement speech, you said the wider the gap between the work you and the real you, the harder it is to feel safe and secure. As a biotech CEO, where you were often the only woman and person of colour, when in your career did you feel the gap was the widest, and what was the turning point that let you close it?
I think it was the widest during my younger career years, when I was really trying to establish myself, improve myself, and potentially that was also some of the most challenging years because sometimes I would start to doubt myself. You know, I really believe in our need to be our authentic selves. That's how we are our most powerful self. It's very difficult to be strong and powerful when you're not being the real you.
Can you share one of some of your favorite affirmations?
So my favorite affirmations are around the I am. We often use them in a way that's not helpful for us, like I am sad, or I am not good enough, or I'm not deserving. So I do a lot of I am affirmations.
So apart from yourself or your younger self, who is the book for?
The book is really for anyone who feels like they don't fit in, or that they need to prove themselves, or they're struggling with some type of leadership or showing up to be their best self.
Sheila, welcome. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jeff. It's so great to be here.
So let's dive in with the first question around the spiritual foundation of being a biotech leader. So let's talk about the ashram decision. So you took a gap year from Northwestern Medical School to live in ashram in South India, a decision that shocked your mother and went against every convention in a medical career path. Looking back, how did that year shape not just who you became as a leader, but specifically how you approach drug development and patient care today?
It was such a hard decision to make. I was in the middle of my medical school, and the thought of getting off sync with my classmates and doing this crazy thing of taking a year off and going to live in an ashram was really kind of shocking to even myself. But it actually turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. And it formed this foundation for me to live the rest of my life. It gave me clarity on my values, my identity, and really my purpose. It also really helped me connect to my inner voice and my inner compass. And I go back to it almost every day in terms of where I'm making decisions, how I'm making decisions, and again, how I'm living my life. So I'd love to tell you more about it. It's something that I was really struggling at the time because I had lost my father a few years earlier, and he was really sick most of my childhood. And so I had a lot of grief that I hadn't really dealt with. And I was actually questioning my purpose and what I was doing and trying to find some peace as well. And I was able to do all of that during that 6 months that I was living there, while delving into this spiritual study and developing these practices that really centered and grounded me. And I talk a lot about that in my career now, that I do these centering practices every day to help me be the best leader I can be, the best physician executive, and to really, really try to help patients.
I think that's a very powerful message, and certainly resonates with me as someone who's moved from another country, just that whole sort of like process. And even if you're talking about a shorter period of time, you don't know what you don't know. And I think the big thing was the credit history, or rather the lack of credit history when you move here. And I think there's so much that goes into that. And my journey is different, but everything you said, unfortunately after I moved out, my mother passed away. Following year, my older brother passed away. So it's just how life is. It's everything sort of like happens at the same time. But I think it's really, someone who's been through that, I think it's really brave to have done that. And sometimes it can be your fear. I know you touched on that in the book. It's sometimes your fear is what holds you back. So I think kudos to you for making this, and especially in the middle of medical school as well.
And like my shout out to people is, do take care of yourself, like do what you need to do. And I think you're right, life throws us curveballs, right? It's just, we're going along our path and all of a sudden something happens that is so unsettling. All of us face these different aspects in our life, and everyone I know has had some challenge, personal, professional, familial, just dealing with parents getting older, or things that happen in our families and friends and loved ones. So, I think we have to find that inner strength and resilience to carry on while taking care of ourselves. And I am really proud that I made that decision. And I could go back and give my younger self a big hug and thank her. I would, because I know it took a lot to do that. And something in me, though, said, I have to do this. And I'm so glad I carried through on that.
Yeah. And I think, when I moved out here, I had a lot of people doubting me. It's like, you've got a track record of doing that in Europe. The US is different. You won't be successful. And I'm proud of the fact that I proved them wrong. So great. Let's move on to the next question. So savor in the C-suite. You've spoken about the Hindu concept of savor. By the way, happy Diwali.
Yes, thank you. Happy Diwali.
Selfless service as central leadership philosophy. In an industry often criticized for prioritizing shareholder returns over patients, how do you actually operationalize savor in boardrooms and pipeline decisions? And can you share a specific moment where that spiritual principle guided a business decision that Wall Street might not have understood?
Yes. So seva is such a beautiful concept or philosophy for me. It does mean to be of service. And it's more than just to be of service in the sense that there's absolutely this idea of serving others. But it's really about this idea of contribution. Like, how are we showing up and what are we adding and being a contributor, not just a consumer? And that's the idea that's articulated. It's a Sanskrit word in the Vedic philosophy of how to live a life of contribution. And through that life of contribution and service, we grow personally. So it's like the gift that keeps on giving back to us. And it's like a win-win. We're helping others around us. We are living a life full of values and integrity, and we are growing in the process through some, not sacrifice, but contribution. And that's where the selflessness comes in, where you're doing that. It's something bigger than yourself. So I feel that is such a great fit for what we do in biotech and pharma. And I agree with you. Many times there's billions of dollars at stake. We have shareholders. We have to do the right things for our company. But it's these principles I learned very early on through the journey I had at the ashram, but also it's some of the early companies I work for. It's actually my medical training. I trained at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston and in internal medicine. The reason I chose that residency was because the residency director, who was Marshall Wolf at the time, said to treat every one of our patients like they were a family member. And if we did that, we would absolutely be giving them the right medical care. We would be making the right decisions because of that care and concern we had for them. And I find that so true, whether that's as a physician in a hospital or developing therapeutics. I went on to Genentech then, and I kind of grew up in biotech at Genentech. And there, all the executives taught me to keep the patient at the center of our decision making. And if we were doing the right thing for the patients and their families, as we thought about developing therapeutics and running our clinical trials, we would be doing the right thing for our businesses and the shareholders. And so I've been able to really anchor in and use that as a kind of core principle, a North Star for my decision making. So I often come back to that when I'm navigating difficult decisions in the boardroom or conversations that we're having and trade-offs that need to be made. I fundamentally believe if we do the right things in terms of, choosing the right indications and thinking about patient safety, we'll be making the right decisions for the shareholders.
I think that's, in these types of conversations that I've been having, it's definitely a central theme, that it's, the reason we're doing this is for the good of patients. And I think, people use the term patient centricity a lot, but I think if that is as you said, your North Star, then you're coming from the right place, and so I think that makes a lot of sense. And as a clinician, originally, then you're sort of uniquely placed to do that.
Yeah, I love this industry for so many reasons, and one of them is because we focus on patients all the time. I mean, we're here to develop life-changing medicines that are really going to be helpful for millions of people around the world. I mean, part of why I left the practice of medicine and academic medicine is to also understand how I could have a bigger impact and more of an impact. Not that individual patient care is not incredibly impactful. My husband's a practicing ER doctor and he's a hero. He saves patients' lives all the time and many times a week, and I'm just in awe of him and all the physicians who are out there actively practicing. But for me, the ability to take a step back and think broadly about how to develop new medicines, how to hopefully change the way we're treating patients and continue to improve that, to give them more choices and improve efficacy outcomes and improve safety, are so meaningful. So I just love our industry where I get to still be that physician executive and keep them at the center of, again, everything that I'm doing. So I feel like it's a total gift and blessing.
Very cool. So next question. So the work you versus the real you gap in your Northwestern commencement speech, you said the wider the gap between the work you and the real you, the harder it is to feel safe and secure. You've been in rooms at McKinsey, Genentech, BMS, and as a biotech CEO, where you were often the only woman and person of color, when in your career did you feel the gap was the widest, and what was the turning point that let you close it?
Yeah, wow, such a good question. I think it was the widest during my younger career years when I was really trying to establish myself, improve myself, and potentially that was also some of the most challenging years because sometimes I would start to doubt myself. And I talk about this in the book for these next generations of leaders to hopefully have them avoid some of that struggle that I experienced. But I really tried to fit in. That gap that you talk about and that I spoke about was, I really believe in our need to be our authentic selves. That's how we are our most powerful self, is coming from that place of authenticity. It's very difficult to be strong and powerful when you're not being the real you. When you have a mask on, you're really trying to fit in. I think it's really true also for the immigrant experience when we, come to new cultures and we're trying to assimilate. And, and I think we change. We change the way we talk. We change the way we dress. We change the way the foods we eat. We do a lot knowingly and unknowingly to do our best to fit in. And we're not really honoring ourselves the way, and just showing up as our true self. And so I did a lot of that during, again, all these early years when I was training and then when I was working in the corporate world, to dress like others and talk like them and, just fit in and belong. But what I didn't realize is that I was not really being my true self. And then because of those successes I had in terms of my early promotions, I was unable to really embrace my leadership style. Because I do think leadership is coming from your authenticity. So I truly believe in authentic leadership. So then I had to take a step back to realize what was my authentic leadership. I had to figure that out for myself. And that then meant I decided, wow, I really actually need to lean into my values and, all of these things that make me. And part of that is understanding that I really care about people and I really respect everyone regardless of their position. And I do believe in humility and I want to work with other people to develop, to build win-win situations. So all of that then came to bear. And when I started embracing more of who I am, I actually found out that I was a really good leader and a differentiated leader and a leader that had followers and And I just felt like I was thriving more and happier too, personally. Because I think it's really difficult to be really happy as well if you have a cognitive dissonance and you're showing up, one way at home and one way at work. You're just really, you start living like a double life. It's very difficult to kind of derive satisfaction from living a life like that. So that's where I felt like I was starting to really assimilate it as I got into these higher levels of leadership, and I could also dictate what I thought the culture should be. And I really do think culture drives performance. So I was really able to come full circle, be my true self, build the culture in which I would want to work in as my younger self, which, really actually just drove performance. And that's what I've been able to do, especially in the small emerging biotech setting.
I think you make a great point about culture, because again, just having had sort of discussions like this, been to a lot of like networking events and listening to other CEOs, it's like that's the first thing that they want to basically do is establish that sort of like culture. And I think when you do that, you can actually establish sort of like teams. You can maybe even take product, because you've got the right culture and the right team, you can actually maybe take products that aren't necessarily the best products, and they can still actually be successful because you've set up the right sort of like culture. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, a wonderful mentor told me one time, always choose the team, always choose the people. The science, of course, is incredibly important in the products you're working on, but a great team can do so much. They can achieve what's beyond possible. Conversely, a not so great team can actually destroy and a lot of value. And we've seen that time and time again as well. So especially drug development, there's always this valley of death that programs sometimes go through, and it's very precarious. It's what we do. It's not for the faint of heart, and we have to thread 1,000 needles to get a drug approved into patients and onto the market. And so, you need to work with an amazing team, and it's not an individual sport. This is a very much a team effort. It takes a village of a lot of exceptionally smart, brilliant, hardworking people to bring a therapy to patients and get through all those hurdles. So the people and the team that we work with is just incredibly important.
So I'd like to move on to the book. So the mirror effect in real time it comes out on the 4th of November. So congratulations. So the 3-part framework: hold up your own mirror, reflect on your surroundings, and make a life worth mirroring. And so I think we can flash up on the screen the front sort of like cover. But if the question, and we've got so much to unpack, but the first question, if you could go back to say 2016 when you were co-founding Gossamer, which part of that framework did you most need then? And what would you tell your younger CEO self? Yes,
well, I did write this book for my younger self. So I would say I needed all of it. But I think one of the big epiphanies I had through my executive experience at Receptos and Gossamer, and then in my board roles, is that I was really operating from a place of fear. Even though I had established myself and I was a powerful leader, and I thought, I had all these successes, and so, I had made it in certain ways, but that need to continue to prove yourself doesn't really go away. It just actually sometimes gets even harder because the goals get bigger, and you get caught in this trap or prison of perfectionism, I like to call it. And it's difficult to kind of continue to maintain that pace. So I would say that the whole idea of holding up your own mirror and facing your FIDs, which I call fear, insecurity, doubt, and shame, so that you can really be free of them and then truly step into your power and be, even more of an authentic leader, is something I wish I had at that time, or I wish I realized I didn't understand how much I was operating from a place of fear. So that's one. And then really understanding your environment. I have found that as we've gotten into higher levels of corporate leadership, we don't necessarily understand our environments, as well as we should. And I think understanding how best to navigate boardrooms, how to be your best leader, your best self in challenging situations, that really requires you to be centered and grounded, so you can assess the environment really objectively and then take the appropriate courses of action. So if you're operating from a place of fear, or you're having some type of inner glass ceiling or limiting thought patterns or beliefs, you're not able to be your best self and show up in the best way possible. So I really wish I had all of this in the book, in terms of that roadmap. But I do think those first 2 sections would have been really, really helpful to have.
So apart from yourself or your younger self, who is the book for?
The book is really for anyone who feels like they don't fit in, or that they need to prove themselves, or they're struggling with some type of leadership or showing up to be their best self. So I do target the book towards women leaders, especially the next generation of women leaders. But it really is meant to be for anyone who, would like to think about how to be a better leader, in the sense that they feel like they're setting themselves up better for success. So it's meant to be broad, because it incorporates a lot of the best practices and my lessons learned on my leadership journey, which is really independent of gender and race or background. But I do target it more towards women. There's a lot of stories about women leaders who faced challenges and how they overcame them, and a lot of lessons learned through my own personal journey. And because I am a woman and person of color, and a woman of color, that intersectionality kind of, shines through, I think. So, but I'm hoping that many people read it. I also have a lot of men who are fathers who also reach out to me, who want to get this for their daughters and their partners and their loved ones. So, and also raising awareness, so that we're kind of understanding and developing a language that we can communicate to each other with. So I really do want to be very inclusive. But I would say next generation of women leaders and people of color would be a great audience for the book.
And I think, having read the book, and I'm actually rereading it.
I know, and here you are, it's a wonderful, audience, member for me.
But I think, firstly, it's really nicely written. It's very easy to read, and I think one of my old sort of mentors always said, if you're trying to write something or explain something, you should write it in such a way that your grandmother can understand. That's kind of the litmus test. And so it's very well written, very easy to read. But I think, and again, genuinely, actually something of interest, like on every page. But what I also, firstly, you don't get taught this stuff when you're growing up. No one tells you about affirmations, and I want to get to affirmations, because I'm big on affirmations. But what I really liked about it is that there's it's not just about your journey. It's actual practical things that people can do, whether it's writing a journal, or keeping track of your feelings, and particular sort of like situations. It's like, well, what's the thing, if you're sensitive to like criticism, what are some of the things that you can do? And again, you talked earlier about sort of like having your power, and so I really like that, because it going to a therapist is great. It's like, what am I going to do? So actually implementing something, and as someone who's worked with a career coach, some actually excellent career coaches, some not so good in the past, is again that practical. What can I do in sort of like in real life to implement this? And so I thought it was really good.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm so happy to hear this. You have no idea how you've just made my entire week. I agree with you. I think I felt like there was this gap, at least for me. Like, there is no playbook or manual of how to step into and be a CEO or a C-level executive. I mean, we're always making things up on the fly, or as we go along, we're learning. But wouldn't it be better if we actually had some tools and resources to help us before we stepped into those rooms, or got us better prepared? And so I really did want to create something that was practical and impactful. And that's just the way I want to operate and live in my life. I try to do that personally with my children and my family, and obviously at work with my employees. And I want to always deliver value. So when I was thinking about writing a book, I was thinking about it with that kind of hat and lens on, of how can I make this impactful for anyone who's going to read it? And how do I make this come alive? Like, we read about lessons learned, and but then that stops, to your point, and it stays in our head. And I want us to get out of our head onto paper, So, and do these, really create exercises and journaling prompts and things that would help us break free of our limiting thought patterns and beliefs and change our habits and shift our mindset so that we would show up differently. And so I was really trying to make that as real as possible for the readers. And so I created this accompanying journal. I created, the summary sections, and I always was thinking about, how do I make this alive? How do I make this alive for the person who's reading this, who's struggling or hearing about a concept for the first time? What's going to make this be more a living tool for them?
So I wanted to ask you about affirmations, and I think we have spoken about that in the past, actually. So my favorite sort of like affirmations, the first one is like about abundance. So abundance, because we all want abundance. So abundance flows into my life in surprising and miraculous ways each and every day. I think that's my favorite one. The second one is all is particularly apt, actually. All is well. I have time enough to do everything I need to do today. And then third one is I'm brave enough to do what makes my heart happy. So those are my three daily affirmations that I say to myself. Can you share some of your favorite affirmations?
Yes, I love them, and I love just the shift from the lack mindset to the abundant mindset, because it's so important when we're in the corporate world. If we think there's only one seat for a woman or one seat for a person of color, like it just makes us so competitive, versus no, we can lift each other up while we're climbing and we can all win in the process, like all boats float. I think that is like what we're trying to do within the Biotech CEO Sisterhood and these other organizations I'm part of. So my favorite affirmations are around the I am. There's a lot of that's been written about I am affirmations, because we often use them in a way that's not helpful for us, like I am sad, or I am not good enough, or I'm not deserving. So I do a lot of I am affirmations. I actually start off the book with a quote from Maya Angelou. And she says, you alone are enough. And so I often use that for myself. I alone am enough. And I belong. I am deserving. I am loved. These are kind of really basic affirmations, but I feel like there's just been so much conditioning I've had in my life that have somehow I've interpreted as other than that, where I'm not enough and I have to prove myself and I don't fit in and I don't belong. So saying these affirmations to me really has created an incredible shift in my mindset. It's around the self-compassion, the self-love, the self-acceptance that I have found really liberating in my life. So yes, I do a lot of I am affirmations.
Very, very cool. So I highly recommend the book to anyone watching, and it's out available from November the 4th, I think.
Yes, you can pre-order it before November 4th, but after November 4th it's available on Amazon. Barnes & Nobles is also available for my my publisher's website, Amplify, both the book and the journal. So yes, you can order it and hopefully enjoy it.
All right, cool. So being a biotech-focused podcast, I wanted to move on to deal making and corporate strategy. So the 7.2 billion education as CMO of Receptos, you built the development, the regulatory and the quality organizations and advanced symposia through approval, then became part of Celgene as they acquired that for 7.2 billion. So what's the most important lesson you learned from that acquisition and that you've applied to every company you've built or advised since?
Yes, well, it's really around keep your head down and do what's right for patients. We were, first of all, we were just a small biotech company. I had a team of 3 other employees and myself in development, regulatory, and quality. I was working with a team of virtual consultants, but I really wanted to create value before we would build out. So I was really disciplined in the way we were executing. So always focusing on executing with excellence, but doing it in a disciplined manner. And I think that's really true today in today's world of the challenging financing environments we're all faced with. Like de-risk, create value, and then build. and hopefully attract capital. So we always rose on the back of positive data. So with that team of just 4 people, including myself, I was able to deliver 2 positive phase 2 trials, which I'm actually kind of shocked that we were able to do that, because I had come from large pharma, Genentech, and then BMS, where I had a ton of resources, teams of hundreds of people. And then I came to a small biotech, and I was doing everything I was doing in those larger teams with a very small team, and actually really nimbly with high quality. So I surprised myself about how much you could get done in small biotech. So that was a huge lesson learned. But then that is a lesson that I've taken forward into other companies about how, by staying lean and finding the right people to fill all those roles, and every role is critically important. I say leadership is independent position, especially in small companies. Like, we're all leaders, we're all leader doers. You can create so much value and focus on the team and the infrastructure and do the right thing in terms of your development plan and the data sets that you're generating to create value for patients and then for your shareholders. So I think that was really, that was what we were doing. And we had, again, 2 positive phase 2 trials. We made the decision to go into phase 3. We were building out the company and running phase 3 programs then, and getting all the regulatory decisions and filings done. And that's when, Celgene came knocking. And I think if we think when you build companies to deliver these therapies for patients, and, we do talk to strategics all along the way, but we don't build companies to be bought, or for sale. We do what's right to develop these therapies. And I think if you do what's right, strategics and pharma are going to be interested in what you're doing. So I feel like that's really fundamental to how I view company creation and building. We focus on building. We don't have the short-term view. We have a longer-term view, and we bring in the right talent. We build up the correct infrastructure. We don't overbuild, but we do take the right steps along the way. And all along, we can communicate with pharma, and and hopefully that will lead to partnerships, collaborations, and potentially acquisitions down the road.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, like, how much many companies are able to sort of achieve. At Polaris, we were running 4 or 5 pivotal trials with a team of 6 people. Now, obviously, we had CROs and other organizations supporting us. But again, if you talk about sort of bootstrapping a biotech, there's an awful lot of that goes on. So I think that capital efficiency is really important.
Yeah, and you don't want to take shortcuts that are going to be damaging to the program by any means, but you do want to, really, we do stretch, we do bootstrap, and we get a lot done, and it's demanding. We ask a lot of our employees, and that's why the culture and the taking care of one another is so important, and the self-care is important too. Because, I don't think I slept for 4 years. It was pretty demanding. And so looking back, would I have built out a little bit more? Probably, just so it wasn't so demanding and draining for me and my team. But that was required at the time. Capital was scarce, and the public markets opened up, thankfully, and we were able to build more. But you do have to kind of take into account what are your capital requirements and what's available for you to get the job done. So right now, I feel like we're back in that environment of really being thoughtful and disciplined about how we're spending our capital, and making sure that we, get through decision gates and de-risk programs before we, deploy a lot of capital, and really are really thoughtful about our budgets.
I think that's reflected across the ecosystem, the challenging sort of environment, and it's not necessarily about de-risking. Well, it is about de-risking, but I think the tolerance for risk is actually a lot lower than it was. Of course, you can't. They want de-risks, but it's almost like they want zero risk, which of course you can't have. So
it's true. They want everything validated and de-risked and everything, and then it's like, but you need to get there. So you need the capital to achieve those milestones. So someone has to take some risk along the way. But I think that fiscally disciplined mindset is just a good one. It's I think a best practice. And for those of us who grew up in the time where capital was constrained, I think we just naturally, understand that and operate that way. So even when capital was flowing, I still didn't think we should overbuild.
Moving on, so I guess in relation to when you were part of the team at Turning Point, when BMS acquired it for 4.1 billion, you're balancing fiduciary duties to shareholders, responsibilities to employees and patients who depend on the pipeline continuing. So how do you navigate that tension, and what do you insist on in that deal structure to protect what mattered beyond the price tag?
In terms of, the Turning Point story, which was such a great story too, wonderful scientific founder, amazing operator CEO, that partnership, and then, building out the team and really helping that therapy come to life in terms of showing the excellent breadth of response and durability of response and being able to move earlier in the treatment paradigm, like just such a wonderful development story based on terrific scientific design of best-in-class molecules. I think just, that, and I think that created so much value. I think that's also, again, the story of fiduciary responsibility as well, in the sense that, huge uprun in stock price, and that was going very well. But as, the markets were cooling down and, COVID happened and we were coming out of that, I think, when BMS came knocking and I was no longer on the board at that time, I think the board had to deliberate to say, is this a deal worth doing at this time, or do we keep going on our own? And I think ultimately they balanced that decision to go ahead and do the deal with BMS. And I think all the shareholders were really happy about that.
When to stop versus when to pivot. You said one of the advantages of biotech over big pharma is our ability to make decisions quickly, to stop programs and to move on to what's next, that sort of go, no go decision. That's emotionally brutal when teams have invested years in a molecule. Can you walk us through a specific decision to kill a program, and how do you distinguish between a program that needs to be stopped versus one that needs to pivot?
Obviously we have to always follow the science, and I think it's the beauty of having a portfolio is, in some ways, it enables you to make those tougher decisions more easily, because you basically have to conserve your resources and prioritize programs. Sometimes in biotechs, we have one asset and we have all our eggs in that basket. So it's harder for us to pivot away from ideas we have and trying to keep a drug alive. But that doesn't necessarily, those aren't necessarily the right decisions to make. So I think, again, following the science and doing what's right for patients is really important. I mean, I can speak to one of the biggest decisions I made at Receptos. At the time when I came in, I was really, really set on developing that S1P modulator for a certain set of indications that were not inflammatory bowel disease, actually. There were other indications. And I had the plans, the ideas. I brought in the thought leaders around that. And I started getting some feedback, actually from some of the thought leaders about, questioning the decisions of the indications I wanted to pursue. And I remember taking a big step back and kind of letting go of that and then deciding then to go into inflammatory bowel disease. And that was a big pivot for me personally as, the clinical leader for the company, the development leader. But I had to keep an open mind and really listen to what was being, kind of what the KOLs were telling me. And that's why I feel like the humility is so important. When we're in small companies, we sometimes we're very internally focused, and we come in with a set of plans. And if I hadn't paused and to take a step back and really listened to what my external advisors were telling me, I think I may have made the wrong decision. So that's an example of pivoting to another disease area that I think makes more sense. And I think, again, we see this all the time in small companies where, there are programs running in certain indications that may not be the right indication for those assets. And so how do we, again, make those decisions? So it's maybe not an idea to stop a program, but you do have to pivot and find the right indications. And shareholders tell us, they tell us, like, they don't like the indications we're in. Strategic pharma also tell us what they, what is exciting for them. Sometimes it's difficult because we truly believe in the scientific rationale for an indication, but there's no one interested in that indication. And so then what do you do, right? Because you can't get investors excited about that. And I do think at the end of the day, we do have to listen to our investors as well. So hopefully you can find a way to continue to further the science in the area where you think there's really high, strong scientific rationale, but still do what's right, best thing for the patients and the companies, because you have to, you have to work with your shareholders. I mean, that's really important. So stopping programs is more clear to me, like safety issues, lack of efficacy. Like when the data is clearly telling you that the drug doesn't work, like stop. Like, don't continue to move that forward. I know of some recent examples of some programs moving forward that have some pretty strong safety signals. And I'm questioning why those drugs have moved forward. So we see that too all the time in small companies and even larger companies where those programs are moved forward into phase 3, and that's still happening around us every day. So, I say, really, I implore the operators, executives, and investors, when there are clear safety issues that are going to really affect the risk benefit of a product, or a drug just doesn't show compelling efficacy, like make the hard decision and stop that program. It's the right thing to do for patients. Conversely, if there's a potential indication that it may be better suited for, let's do our job and figure that out too. At Receptos, we had licensed in the IL-13 antibody from AbbVie, and they wanted to move it forward in asthma, but there were 2 failed studies with tralokinumab and lebrikizumab from AZ and Genentech, which were reading out. And so at that time, I decided not to do that. And then we pivoted to eosinophilic esophagitis, which I thought would be a better indication for it. So, you just have to kind of look at all the data and make decisions about where to develop your therapies.
Yeah, I mean, again, you make a good point. It's all about the data. And I think, not to call out specific programs, but I think, compounds that have gone into phase 3, it was less of a safety issue, more of an efficacy. But actually, if you'd looked at the PK data, you would never have gone into phase 3 based on that. But because there's a lot of pressure, not just from investors, but from the board, whatever it might be, those and ultimately those were very expensive phase 3 failures. So it's all about the data at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's not sometimes easy decisions to make, but at the end of the day, we just have to follow the science. We have to follow the data. And we know, I think, when the data is showing you that it's not, going to meet the target profile, which we need to do. So I think also keeping the end goal in mind and always focus on what that target product profile is, and making sure that we have appropriate objectives. We need to develop differentiated therapeutics for our patients. And if they're not meeting that bar, we shouldn't continue to waste, valuable resources and capital on things that are going to be like suboptimal therapies. And there's a lot more competition now. So the bar in any one disease area is rising, which I think is a good thing for patients and their families. So, we need to improve efficacy outcomes. We need to develop safer therapies. We need to develop therapies that are kind of more easily administered, more conveniently administered, so patients will stay on them. We have to really continue to demand more of the therapies that we're developing.
You make another good point about starting with the end in mind. I think fortunately it's less common now, but for some early stage biotechs, there's not necessarily a lot of thinking about sort of like the commercial piece. You mentioned the TPP, and I think if you look at the more successful companies, they've actually engaged on that side of things at the very beginning. And again, start with the end in mind. So I think it's more common to include that now, fortunately, which again comes back to sort of like fiduciary sort of responsibility and using the funds efficiently.
Yeah, and I think there's a maturing that's also occurred. Like I can at least speak for the San Diego ecosystem. I know when I first arrived here 15 years ago, there's such a rich, vibrant research ecosystem here. We have all the academic institutions, the research institutes, obviously UCSD, Scripps, Salk, La Jolla, Institute. I mean, there's so many, Sanford Burnham, like amazing institutions. And we have a lot of the pharma companies had their research sites here, but they were primarily doing discovery work, right? So a lot of the pharma, unfortunately, some of those have closed down those research sites. So when I arrived, there wasn't as much development and commercial talent and just kind of that experience for individuals who had worked in large pharma organizations. And because I came in having done development work for late stage in BMS, I was the global therapeutic area head running all of the immunology at BMS. I thought about this day in, day out. I also did that at Genentech, but and then I was at McKinsey for a few years. So I really had a commercial mindset and a late stage development mindset. So I was obsessed with the target product profile and thinking about what our label could be, and then I was bringing that to make decisions on the early stage portfolio at BMS. So there was a lot of great lessons learned, best practices that I grew up with in large pharma that I brought to the small biotech, which we all have to do when we're thinking about creating a new development program. We have to think about, can it reach that target profile with the changing competitive landscape in mind as well. So we have to do a thorough competitive landscape assessment. We have to understand what the field's going to be 5-10 years from now, and what is our drug potentially going to deliver, and will it have the attributes that will make it successful commercially and clinically. So I agree with you, but I think there's been a lot more of that that's been infused into this ecosystem now. So I think you do see a lot more of that now.
Yeah, and again, I don't know, it's something we've chatted about in person before, but I guess the biotech model is we take it to that sort of value inflection point and then you sell it. But I think, there are some, notable sort of examples of companies here in San Diego that are now sort of like going commercial. So I think there's probably, a decision for all of us to like collectively make, and it's like, well, do we want to just do that, or do we want to have like more sort of commercial sort of like companies? But I think it's more that we, the commercial stuff, I think it's more of what we should be doing.
I absolutely agree. And I think it's shifting right now too. I think that whole model before of getting it to just like the POC, and that I think, as you're saying, there are lots of companies that are financing through phase 3 and really going to commercial approval, marketing approval, and early commercialization. So I think you have to be prepared now to take a drug all the way through. And regardless of that, you have to have that commercial and development mindset and advice and input into these programs and into these companies that are early stage.
Yeah. And I think, part of it comes back to, it's all about the data. So if the data is good, you perhaps look to out-license it at clinical of proof of concept. But if the data is really good, then you want to keep hold of yourself. But of course, it then becomes a completely different proposition in terms of time and money that you need to sort of like invest.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to some companies here, though, in San Diego actually commercializing. I think it's going to be amazing for the ecosystem.
Yes, I would agree. So next question. So you're on multiple sort of like boards. I think executive chair of Ventyx, Lila Biologics, Adarex, Janux Therapeutics, doing some really amazing stuff, spanning rare disease, immunology, oncology, and novel modalities. So how did you decide which boards to join? And more importantly, which incredible opportunities to say no to? What's your litmus test?
Yeah, it's a process. I had someone describe it as like a 3-legged stool, which I like that analogy. So the 3 pillars I look for, one is I have to be really excited about the science, because I'm a geek and a science geek, and I love learning about new areas, especially if it's something that I could learn a lot about that's new. So for example, T-cell engagers and masking technology for Janux, RNA therapeutics for 8RX, more antibody and small molecule work on the immunology side, new disease areas. All of it is so interesting to me. So if something gets me really excited scientifically, that is cool. Lila Biologics up in Seattle is an AI machine learning protein design company spun out of David Baker's lab. So cutting edge and great people. So that's the second pillar. So cutting edge science is really, really interesting to me. And then the people who are involved, really, very important. Are they, who are they? Are they, not only, they're smart and brilliant, but they're just good people. They have great values. I want to help them. Because life is short and you want to work with great people and find your people. So that's really important. And then the third is more kind of like logistic and practical. Like, is it finance? Who are the investors around the table? Do I believe that the development plan or the operational plan can deliver the right milestones that would enable the next set of financings in a really powerful manner. So I had to kind of understand that plan and really believe in it thoroughly and know that the company has enough capital and finances to do that, or really just believe that we can get there. So, and then I have to believe in the development and regulatory path. So I kind of put that into like a practical budget of execution and operationalizing a company. So, yeah.
So since you mentioned AI machine learning, and I have to thank our previous guest for this question, but the question is, how do you sort out the fluff from the value when it comes to sort of like AI? You know, AI is here. I think it's an important sort of like tool, but yeah, how do you sort out the fluff from the value in AI in general?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've kind of gotten tricked about this too. I actually invested in an early stage AI company, great people, but kind of too early. Like, I think it just gets back down to, again, what is the science? What are the therapeutics or programs? What's the target profile? How is this delivering and enabling it? You know, and just kind of get into AI machine learning is a tool like any other tool. But at the end of the day, like, what is the science and what's the science telling us, and what are the programs that it's delivering? So it's just kind of using all of our best practices, but then, you know, understanding the way we assess programs and technologies, understanding that it's AI ML. So not that AI ML is going to deliver something that's, you know, something that we've never been able to do before. Let's be science and data focused and kind of assess what's in front of us. And from that perspective, like, I have brought a lot of development capabilities into Lila, so that there's that partnership between people who are deploying and employing these tools, which is amazing because they can optimize and iterate faster than ever before and have breakthroughs that we haven't been able to achieve. But it's still very much anchored in the development mindset and then delivering data packages that show the continued improvement on the profile of the candidates that we're studying and assessing. So that really makes sense to me, and I think that's a powerful combination.
3 IPOs and multi-billion-dollar exits. You've taken 3 biotech companies public. So for founders listening who are pre-Series A or Series B, what's the single biggest misconception about going public that could derail them? And what should they be building into their company culture from day one if that's the eventual path?
Well, just that going public is not the answer to any problem. Going public is just another milestone, and it's just an enabler of the company's strategies, operational plans, culture, growth. You know, it's really going public comes with a whole set of other challenges. You know, then you're constantly watching your stock, and you have to keep delivering on data to investors who have a short attention span and time frame. So it puts a lot of pressure onto the company, the executives, the employees, and there's a lot that's out of your control in the public markets, as we know, especially in this day and time. So it's again, it's not for the faint of heart. So just to know that my advice to anyone who going public sometimes is an incredible enabler, because it allows you to get access to so much capital and the necessary amounts of capital that we need to run our development programs, which are just capital intensive, you know, because that's the industry that we're in. But I tell people, you know, don't look at the stock price, focus on, you know, what you're operating on and deliver with high quality what you're meant to do. So, you know, the executives do have to worry about the stock price, and they have to be out there really focusing on communicating and doing efficient communication and making sure there's transparency and bringing their investors along with them. But for the employees in the company, I'm like, you know, just keep your head down and, you know, keep delivering and executing on what you need to be doing.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is that if you do all of that, the stock price will take care of itself. So.
That's right.
Okay, moving on to science and pipeline. From Zeposia to seralutinib, Zeposia, which you advanced at Receptos, is now approved for MS and ulcerative colitis. And then seralutinib, which you in-licensed as Gossamer's lead asset, is in phase 3 for PAH, so pulmonary arterial hypertension. Both are first-in-class mechanisms. What pattern do you see in the molecules that you champion, and what makes you bet big on a novel target when the risk is so high?
Yes, well, it's really around differentiation. Again, following the scientific biologic rationale. For a novel mechanism, like I have to be convinced of the biology. So what are the mechanisms at stake? So I just have a very translational, view. Now, that translational view is limited by whatever we know about that target. And sometimes we think we know something, but it actually turns out not to be the case. And we learn that clinically because we take these hypotheses forward and we test it out clinically and we see definitively, does that work or not? At Genentech, I was very involved with the anti-CD20 franchise, so we were depleting B cells, but we didn't know which autoimmune diseases this would be effective in or not. And to our surprise, incredibly effective in multiple sclerosis. Always thought to be a T cell mediated disease, right? But B cells have, I think, antigen presenting functions and all these other aspects, so it works very well. So at the end of the day, we do have to do the clinical trials and experiments, but as best we can, look at the translational biology and see, does this make sense scientifically? That's number one. And number two, especially for mechanisms that are, that there is some clinical data, then, or there's other assets in the field. So maybe you aren't first in class, but you're trying to be best in class. Then it's really around differentiation. And is it clinically meaningful? And for me, the litmus test is like, would I use this? Would I prescribe it over existing therapies or not? And would I prescribe this for my family members? Would I prescribe this for myself? Would I take this? And if the answer is no, then it's a real question of like, why are we developing it?
Yeah, the key words there were clinically meaningful. So, you might have something that might be statistically significant, but is it clinically significant?
Yeah, and I'm not like a snob about that either, in the sense that I really believe in improvements for patients. So if there's a drug that's BID or TID, like to twice a day or 3 times a day administration, moving that to a once a day pill is really important for patients. That's important for me. I'm not great at taking pills. So if I had to take a drug once a day, I know I will have better adherence. I'm constantly forgetting taking pills, and I don't like taking injections. So, the more, so I don't dismiss drugs that are really better in terms of dosing convenience, because I do think that would lead to better outcomes for patients in the real world setting. It's better if they're also improving efficacy and safety and other aspects. I think that's really clear. But I look for all types of improvements if I really do think they're going to make patient outcomes better.
So the immunology through line, your career has been anchored in immunology, BMS, Genentech, Receptos, Gossamer, and multiple board seats. So we're in an extraordinary moment with cell therapies, ADCs, bispecifics, AI-designed molecules. What's the most underrated opportunity in immunology that the field is sleeping on?
Yeah, well, that's such a good question right now. I think it's this idea of what other therapeutic modalities can we deploy in immunology. I don't think it's underrated. It's just more like, I think it's just starting we're just starting to interrogate that. So RNA therapeutics are incredibly powerful, potent, effective. How can we bring that more into the immunology area? I think we're seeing that really powerfully with cell therapy. Cell therapy has limitations now with in vivo cell therapy. Maybe we'll be able to crack that, but those are early days. So the way I view it is like thinking about novel disease areas or new disease areas from some other therapeutic modalities that have been validated in other spaces. I think that's a huge area of exploration for us, and one that I'm really excited to explore.
The MD advantage. So you're a physician, scientist, executive with clinical training at Brigham, Harvard, UCSF, Stanford. So most biotech CEOs don't have your clinical depth. In a specific developmental development decision, trial design, endpoint selection, regulatory strategy, can you give an example where your clinical training led to a different conclusion than your team initially proposed?
It's such a difficult question, but yeah. So I am a clinician, I'm a physician, and I'm a drug developer. So I I've spent, not only do I have a clinical background in training, which a lot of amazing investors and CEOs and executives have, they're clinicians, but I also then spend several decades developing drugs and actually going through the rigors of trial design and having successful trials and failed trials and negotiating labels and doing advisory committees. So I've kind of been through that whole machinery and I've learned so much. So you can't take that out of me. So even when I'm investing or when I'm an executive, I'm always thinking with a development mindset. And so when I work with like CEOs who are research scientists, or when I'm looking at data packages with my team, sometimes I do come up with different conclusions about the feasibility or the probability of technical success than others. And also I just know the clinical disease area as well too. So I kind of understand if this is going to be, I think, clinically attractive to that specialty and to patients who are being treated there. Or the flip side is that it will be really attractive, but other investors aren't seeing it, or my board members aren't seeing it, or my employees aren't seeing it. But I'm like, no, this is actually going to be really, really important. So that's how it plays out in different ways. But at the end of the day, I really do rely on that wealth of experience and that knowledge base to help guide me in terms of the companies I choose and what I do with the programs I'm working on.
So let's move on to the Biotech CEO Sisterhood. And so you co-founded this, which has become a phenomenon with sister groups now forming across the C-suite. What was the exact moment you realized this needed to exist? And critically, how do you structure it so it's not just a networking, but actual power sharing and opportunity creation?
Now, I remember we were coming out of COVID. It was like 2021. And I think it was just a day, I think I was feeling even more lonely, a little isolated than even normal because of probably COVID and just the environment. And I just realized that I just said it was time. Like something in me was just like, we have to do this. It's time. And it just came from this very deep place inside of me. I think it was from that very deep place inside of me that I also started writing this book. And I called up my dear friends, Angie Yu and Julia Owens, and we had been talking about it for a while. Like it wasn't like something that was completely novel. It was like we have to get a group of women CEOs together. We have to get a group of women CEOs together. We kept talking about this, and we had been helping each other out. But something in us just said, no, this is the time. Like, what are we waiting for? And so we just took action, and we just came up with a list of every woman CEO we knew that we wanted to invite and we thought would be supportive of other women. And that turned out to be 50. And it kind of shocked us that there were 50 women out there. Actually, it surprised ourselves. We invited all 50 and 25 said yes. And then we organized a weekend in like early 2022 to get together. And we just showed up, and it was amazing. That's where I talk about the transformative power of mirrors, because that's what it was for me personally. Walking into that room, being surrounded by talented, brilliant women, leaders, all of whom, reflected me back to me. And I didn't have to prove that I fit in. I didn't have to, do anything except be myself. And it was just a very novel, amazing experience. And I said, oh my God, this is what I want in my life. And so the Biotech CEO Sisterhood was born that weekend. We're up to over 450 women CEOs now, public and private. And as you said, we're kind of further building out the organization to these CXO sisterhoods, CFO, CMO, CHRO, CSO. And it's just kind of becoming this amazing, safe community where we just really go out of our way to help each other. And we are proving that you can lift each other up while climbing, and we can all be successful together. And if anything, we are amplifying each other and enabling each other to be more successful. And so that's that abundance mindset that we're cultivating. And we're kind of shifting the mindset from what it was before, which I think was lack and competition and scarcity and fighting and struggling, to empowering, celebrating, and enabling. I just think it's been a beautiful experience.
You've said you've been in countless rooms where I never saw anyone like me. So there's research showing that being the only one carries cognitive load that impacts performance. So for the MD, PhD, or woman of color who is about to walk into the room for the first time, maybe there's a first board meeting or first Series A pitch. What's the mental framework you wish someone had given you?
Well, I think it's really what I lay out in the book. The first part of the framework is really knowing that you are a powerful person who absolutely belongs and is worthy and capable, to believe in yourself and know that you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You just have to show up as your authentic self. And that's the first part of the book, is hold up your own mirror and know thyself. Because if we don't do that work and really know that deeply in our deep in ourselves and in our cells, we can easily be thrown off. When we walk into those rooms, we start doubting ourselves. We say, well, do we really belong here? We don't even realize we're having those doubting thoughts. I call them, again, the FIDs, the fear, insecurity, doubt, shame. We don't even know the FIDs are there. And it's inhibiting us from just being relaxed and showing up. So sometimes we have to pay attention to our body. Are we feeling tense? Do we have that nervous feeling in our gut? Are the hairs on the back of our neck standing up? Are we just kind of like a little bit hypervigilant? I was hypervigilant for years, but I just didn't recognize it until I really knew what it felt like to be super relaxed. So I just want people to have that awareness of, if they feel like they are on edge, and they are feeling nervous, which is totally natural and normal. These are the realities in which we face. We find ourselves the one and only many times in these rooms. I still do. I was in JP Morgan earlier this year. We were doing Wear Pink Tuesday. We had that amazing photo shoot with hundreds of women in Union Square.
Yeah, I saw. It's very cool.
And I walked into an elevator and I was the only woman, the only person in pink. And I just looked around and I said, oh my goodness, I just went from that Union Square experience to this elevator experience. And I just laughed, because I was so happy. My cup was full. And when you have that and you believe in yourself and you know that you're powerful beyond measure, when you step into those rooms, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you don't see yourself reflected, because you know who you are and you're operating from that place. That's your new normal. And so that's what I really stress upon for people who are finding themselves in that situation and who are gearing up to go into some of those boardrooms for the first time. Do that work, journal about it, write about it, understand yourself as best you can so that you'll be as centered and grounded when you walk into those rooms.
And you write about it in the book. I think there's a section where you implemented at one of the workshops, like actually sort of like doing some breathing, and I think you write about, it's like, was this the right thing to do in this, like, this room full of people? But you was like, no, this is the right, and then just that transformed the energy in the room. And then I think someone actually came up to you like afterwards and was just like, I thank you, I belong here. So even simple stuff like your breathing technique,
Yeah, it's huge. That's one of the later sections one of the later chapters in the book is really around, called harnessing your presence. But it's more than just like having executive presence. It's like, how do we center and ground ourselves? Because so much of communication is nonverbal. So as soon as you show up, people are, making impressions of you and assumptions about you. But regardless of what they think about you, it's just more around, are you in your body? Are you feeling confident? Because that's what's most important. Earlier today, someone asked me, do I actually do the power poses before I go into rooms? And yeah, I do. I will stand up straight. I will breathe. I will do deep breathing.
This is a good one.
This is a good one. Yeah. Or this one, or like, yeah.
Crossing the finish line.
It's very powerful. Try it. People should try it and see if it makes a difference for them. So, Yeah, no, I totally think it's so important to really ground yourself and do active poses, breathing, and manage your nervous system. Our nervous systems are meant to be managed.
In the mirror effect, you distinguish between mentorship and sponsorship. You've mentored hundreds, but sponsorship using your power to open doors is different. Can you share a specific example where you sponsored someone who reminded you of your younger self and what happened?
A lot of my sponsorship now really comes through giving people job opportunities, so I feel like when I see someone who I really think is incredibly talented and, hardworking and has high energy, I just would love to try to find a way to work with that person. So I'm always like, okay, let's find a role for you. So I recently hired a woman to join my team, and she's young and she's so energetic and she has so many great new ideas, and she can't help herself. She's just like, new idea, new idea, new idea. And I think she's incredibly talented, and I just feel like she has this very bright future in front of her. And I love how she's able to speak up. And I feel like I do see my younger self in her before all the conditioning got layered on. And so I have been encouraging her to keep giving me all her new ideas, and I don't want to shut her down. And I'm really curious to see how this is going to evolve. And so she's like working with me on one of my companies. Yeah. So that's really great. Other examples of sponsorship were actually for sometimes women kind of get a difficult reputation for one reason or another. And so myself and some of the other CEO sisters, sometimes we will actually be proactive in trying to address that. So you may have heard sometimes, women are kind of labeled as difficult or have sharp elbows or they don't listen. And we're like, well, why do you say that? Like, what are the facts behind that? What actually happened? Especially for those women who I've actually worked with in the past, because I know I've actually worked with them. So I know how collaborative they are. I know what their strengths are, and I had that personal experience. So for those women, I can actually really go to bat for them and, call up recruiters and board members and say, no, actually, and be a proactive reference. So I've done that, and it's so powerful. And it's, and many times it's led to that person getting a role, whether that's an executive role or a board role. But even if it doesn't, it still helps us shift the narrative on that person.
So moving on to diversity beyond demographics. So biotech boards and C-suites are slowly diversifying gender and race. I think we've moved from 25% to 27%. So we are making some progress. But there's also neurodiversity, socioeconomic background, non-traditional career paths. So when you're recruiting for a board seat or an exec role, how do you think about diversity beyond the visible dimensions?
Yes, it's so important. I myself am a strong introvert. I play an extrovert while on TV, but I really have a lot of respect and understanding for introverts. And and people operate in different ways. So I think if really looking for the types of skill sets and capabilities you want on your team, also the mix of different backgrounds, whether someone has that research, clinical, commercial, regulatory. So I think getting a really nice, diverse set of perspectives around the board table is very, very important. So I think it's, sometimes we do the mapping exercise where we look at functional areas. That's an easier one to get at. The personalities themselves is sometimes a little bit more difficult, because we're all, interviewing and trying to show up and, in effective communication styles. It's hard to know who's maybe more introverted or, different aspects of kind of even that neurodivergent type, things. But I do think when people come up with different perspectives or, kind of not controversial, but contrarian ideas, I think that's important to pay attention to, because you want those naysayers on your board. You want people to be thinking differently. And so I think I have been part of actively looking for people who have diverse perspectives.
Just to add a point it comes back to culture. And I think, if you have the right sort of culture, the right environment, then it's actually, as long as you do it in a respectful way, then it's actually okay to challenge some assumptions or thoughts or whatever it might be.
Exactly. I believe in high-performing teams. The framework, the norming, forming, storming, and then performing. If you're not having some challenges and tension and different perspectives, and either people are way too similar or they're just not speaking up. And so I really believe to get to true performance, you have to have diversity of opinions. Because that's when the best ideas come about. And that's when also you understand if you have any blind spots and you can address them effectively. So I think having active dialogue, discussion, debate is really critical.
So moving on to future, you're now back to founding and building several biotech companies focused on high unmet medical needs. Without violating any confidentiality, what therapeutic areas or modalities are you most excited about for the next decade, and why?
Yes, well, I am obviously still very passionate about disease areas in the immunology area because it's something I've been doing for the last 3 decades, and I really understand those disease areas, and I am just have a natural affinity for them. So right now I'm very focused on understanding how to improve efficacy outcomes for patients. So as you know, I do think combination therapies and combining different mechanisms is probably the next frontier. We've done a great job of developing these monospecifics or targeting individual mechanisms, but that'll only get you so far, I think, in terms of efficacy improvement, especially when you're looking to achieve like deep, long-lasting, sustained remission for patients with autoimmune conditions or inflammatory disorders, similar to obviously, clinical remission for oncology patients. So I do think combining mechanisms in a really thoughtful, synergistic way is going to be very exciting. So I am really interested in bispecifics and other enabling technologies that will allow us to target more than one mechanism in a safe and tolerable manner. Because I do want to improve efficacy outcomes for patients. So that's a really big area. And getting at that with the therapeutic modalities, as I was talking about for RNA therapies or cell therapies or even T-cell engagers, in terms of getting to the deeper, translational effects is also very exciting. And then I'm really curious to see what we're able to do with AI/ML, because I've been pretty blown away by the protein design work we've been able to do at Lila. I think that's going to be unlocking a whole new field of potentially different targets we could go after, different chemical moieties that we didn't know even existed in terms of scaffolds. I think it's just going to be a new kind of, groundbreaking type of technology.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is everyone's wrestling with AI, the real versus the hype. So, you've been through the genomics revolution, biologics revolution, cell therapy revolution. How are you thinking about AI differently in your current company building, and what's the mistake you see companies making with AI first strategies?
Well, I do think AI is going to be helping us become more efficient, for sure. I already see that in our companies. In terms of just, taking notes, summarizing key outcomes, making sure we're on task, that project management, more administrative tasks. I think that's there. I see it a lot in our regulatory documents and filings. It's amazing what we're able to achieve in our presentations, communications. We should be deploying AI so we can be more efficient. I think we can do a lot more with less people and really high quality objectives as well. I grew up at the time where we used to send truckloads of boxes for paper filings to the regulatory authorities, and we'd be ringing bells, and it was an incredible amount of work. And then we had electronic submissions. Now we're taking this to the next level, where we're going to have documents written very quickly, and we're going to be QCing them. But I think it's going to just be incredibly efficient. So I think in terms of operational excellence and execution, AI is really going to play a big role. And then I think it's around the innovation. That's going to be, I think, what we don't know as much about, but I do think it's here, and it's really going to inform what we're doing. And those who aren't deploying AI probably, will start needing to work with people who can use it really well. So I think there's going to be that partnership and collaboration that's going to happen. That's going to take us hopefully to the next level of innovation. And breakthrough discoveries that we may not have been able to get there with our current tool set. I think the mistake is just like the overhype of like what AI can deliver and promising. I think we got to still be thoughtful and rigorous and take every step that we're taking, but just be smart about how we're using those tools.
And thank goodness we don't print out the documents anymore. So at Polaris, for the BLA submission, just the clinical and non-clinical packages were 393,000 pages. So if we had have printed that out, then it would have been as tall as a 15-story building. So again, thank goodness we don't do that anymore.
No, I think it seems so archaic, but it wasn't that long ago.
So the 90% failure rate, so drug development has a 90% failure rate plus or minus. So you've had massive successes and also programs that didn't make it. For someone early in their biotech career who just lived through their first phase 2 failure and is questioning whether they can handle the emotional toll of the industry, what would you tell them?
Well, first of all, that this is part of the process. It's not something to be thought of. I don't even like that word failure. I think we're doing really rigorous science. We're doing lots of experiments that are furthering our body of knowledge. And so when we test an experiment clinically and it doesn't work, that is incredibly valuable information that adds to that body of knowledge. So, and it makes us smarter, better, and we have to learn and bounce back and continue to move forward. So I would say, get connected again to your higher purpose of what you're doing, why you're doing it. For me, it's about helping patients. And so if that drug didn't work for whatever reason, it's time to go to the next set of mechanisms that we want to interrogate and study. But it is around being resilient, not getting too attached to any specific thing that we're working on, and staying connected to the higher vision of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
So again, comes back to the book, Know Thyself.
Know thyself, and connect to that higher vision for yourself, get clear on that inner voice and your inner compass and keep coming back to that. Because when you think and when you align to vision and missions that are bigger than ourselves, it gives us so much strength and courage, to keep moving forward, to do what's right for patients, for our family members, because we're trying to do good in the world. And that's something that's so much bigger than any one of us.
So when you're 80 years old and looking back, what would you feel like your career mattered beyond the exits and the approvals? Is there a specific population of patients or a specific change in the industry that you want to look back and say, I've helped make that happen?
And unfortunately, that 80-year-old threshold is coming closer and closer. I'm just so amazed and proud, humbled and honored for all the drugs I've worked on, especially those that have made it to the clinic. And I hear about patients being treated with the drug that I worked on. That's just so rewarding and is, again, something it's such a highlight for me in my life. So I kind of think, there are definitely these different therapeutic modalities I'm excited about. I love going after unmet need. An area that I'm very passionate about right now is progressive multiple sclerosis, because I've now developed 2 drugs that are approved in relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, Ocrevus and Zeposia. But for patients with progressive MS, right now, they don't really have any treatment options. There are hopefully some that are going to be coming to be approved, but they still have some safety issues. So that's an area I'm really highly passionate about. Obviously, patients with neurodegenerative disorders as well. There's so many areas that have high unmet need that there are not great treatment options for. If we can solve some of those, that would be really incredibly, meaningful. But mostly, I am still honored and excited by any drug that actually makes it to the clinic. Like you said, there's a 90% plus failure rate. I always think it's a miracle when a drug does get approved and actually is helpful and effective in treating patients. So I'm so proud of our industry and everyone working in it to make those outcomes happen. So yeah, I'm just going to keep at it and try to get as many drugs approved as I can.
So as we wrap up, is there any questions that I didn't ask, or is there any final comments you wanted to share?
No, just I'm so grateful to be here with you, and thank you for reading my book. And it really helps me to hear how it resonated with you personally, because I think all of us in this together, I really do believe that we're all in it together. And so the more that we have shared experiences, I think the more, the better we can work together. So I was just so happy to hear that.
Sheila, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Innovating Tomorrow's Medicine with Dr. Jeff Trickett.